All right, Rabosai, good morning. Let us begin. Baruch Hashem, a lot to do today. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Tishrei. Dr. Linda Weinberg, Sarah and Ricky Gratz, Julia, Rena, and Eve, in loving memory of their husband, Father Zayda, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Peretz, Moshe ben Avraham, David, and commemoration of his second yahrzeit. To thank Ayal and Sara Steinberg, thank you, for dedicating the shurim this month, zechus for refuah shelema, for shulamis bas susha, Adam and Yudit Ben Zev, and the zechus of all of our tefillos being miskabel. Our week of learning sponsors, Avi Zeisman, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his grandfather, Avrem ben Aaron, and Tzvi and Shendi Shir, in honor of the entire Kehila, Shmuel and Shira Pepper, in honor of Ari Lerner, and all that he does for the shul. Now, let's say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. All right, text your friends and tell them that it's the last week of Kesuvos. What's going on over here? All right, so let's go. Today's daf is Kuf Yud 110, and we are picking up in Yirtzeh Hashem at the Mishnah on Kuf Yud Amud Aleph. If we have actually a little bit of time today, which we definitely won't, but if we happen to have some time today, I'm going to go back and just share with you an interesting insight on yesterday's daf. Oh, actually, you know what? I made a mistake. I'm sorry. We left off actually on the bottom of Kuf Tessim Days, the last couple of lines, the last case. A man said, before he died, I want to go ahead and leave a palm tree over for my daughter. Shachiv, he died. Shavik trei palgi digla. So interestingly enough, he had a bunch of palm trees in his possession. He happened to also have left behind 2 palm trees that he owned in partnership with another person. So what did the Yisomim want to do? So the Gemara said, Yasir Rashi the Kakashile mi kari inchi the trei palgi digla olo. So we'll say, interesting. The Yisomim, what do they want to do for their sister? What do the brothers want to do? By the way, it doesn't have to be their sister, but what do they want to do for the daughter? The father said, leave the girl over a palm tree. So the Yisomim said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give the daughter the 2 half palm trees. In other words, the 2 palm trees that our father owned 50% in, and that'll give her the total of a palm tree. In other words, they would rather do that because obviously Rashi points out it's a bit of a headache to go ahead and own a palm tree in partnership with someone. So they wanted just to give her those 2 partial palm trees, and that should satisfy the obligation. So the shaila is, do 2 halves make a whole? Right? Father left his daughter a palm tree, do 2 halves make a whole? Amar li Rav, Amar li Mordechai Ravashi, Hachi Amar Avimi Me'agrunya, Shmei Derava, Karu Inshi L'Trei Pagi Digli Digla. People do in fact call 2 partial palm trees a palm tree. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, ultimately again, that would be good enough for them to leave them for it. Shabbos say such a profound yisod in avodas Hashem as well. That sometimes in order to accomplish something, you don't need to do something as a whole unit. You don't need to do something perfectly. You don't have to do something that is totally intact in order for it to matter. Like the Gemara says, Karu inchu the trei palgi digli digla. Sometimes a half here, a half there, a little bit of good over here, a little bit of good over there, even an incomplete mitzvah here, an incomplete mitzvah there, ultimately is mitzaref, combines together to help forge a meaningful, beautiful, spiritual identity. Good. We'll say, let's go back to Kuf Yud. Top of the Daf, the Mishnah, 110a. Hamotzi shtarcho val chavero, v'alo hotzi shamachar lo as hasadat. So this is a very interesting case. So imagine for a moment, Ruvain takes out a shtarchov, a loan document that he has against Shimon. Okay, Shimon v'alo hotzi shamachar lo as hasadat. Shimon goes ahead and takes out a document that shows that Ruvain sold him a field. Now I both say, now what's happening over here is as follows. Shimon is claiming, Ruvain, had I really owed you money, you would have never sold me a field. The fact that I have a document saying that you sold me a field indicates that the loan document is forged. Take a look at the top Rashi. Halova hotzi alav shtar mechira meuchares l'shtar halva. So I will say, so again, the borrower produced a sale document that is dated after the loan document. Va'omer shtarcha mezuyaf. The loan document is either forged or already paid. Shema yisi chayiv lecha lo hayisi mocher liyas hasada shaya lecha ligbos es chovcha. So I will say, listen to this. See what Shimon's timing is like this. If I really owed you money, further owed you money, then the truth is, when you were selling me the field, you would have gotten the payment and you would have said, okay, thank you, and you would have kept that payment as payment for the loan, and ultimately, again, would not have given me the field. The fact that you sold me the field indicates that I didn't really owe you any money. All right, Admon Omer, Admon could say, Yachol Shiomar, Ruvain, the lender / seller, could say, Ilu hayisi chayiv l'cha, hayi l'cha lihi pari eshelcha. I'm sorry. So Admon Omer, I should really do this, I'm jumping the gun a little bit. Admon says, Yachol Omar, Yachol Hushi Omar, Ilu hayisi chayiv l'cha, Shimon, the borrower / recipient of the land, the purchaser, could say, if I truly owed you money, you should have simply kept the quote unquote purchase funds in satisfaction of the debt when I paid you for the field. Since you didn't keep those funds, but rather you sold me the field, that indicates that what? There was no outstanding debt. The Chachamim say, it's not true. Two different transactions. And in fact, Reuven did something very interesting. What did Reuven do? So Reuven's a smart guy. See, if you think about it, by the way, it's actually in Reuven's best interest to go and sell Shimon a field. Why? Because listen to this. In the event that Shimon can't go ahead and pay back the debt, Reuven knows that what? There's something ultimately, again, that he could seize in satisfaction of the debt. So in fact, it's a good strategic move. So we'll say fundamental machlokes, Admon and the Chachamim. Says the Gemara, my time in the Rabbanon, Shapir Ka'amar Admon. The truth is, Admon is advancing a pretty compelling idea. What's the svara of the Rabbanon? To which the Gemara says, you're right. Ba'asra diyav izuzi v'hadar ksiv shtara. And if you live in a place, where Rabbi says, it's actually interesting, real estate transactions took place different ways in different places. So in a place where it was common to first give money and then write the shtar. See what I say? So sometimes, ultimately, again, you would pay first, write shtar later. So in a place where they would pay first and then write the shtar, kuli amalo pligi dimatzi amarle, hayelachal lefrach hashalcha kishemacharti desasada. Because listen to this. So in a place where they pay first and then write the shtar later, everyone agrees that Shimon's taina is a good one. If I really owed you money, then the moment I gave you the money, what should have happened? You would have kept that money as what? Satisfaction of the debt, and you would have never given me the piece of land. That makes sense. So, kipli, where does the machlokis come up? Ba'asra the kasvi shtar v'hadi yavi zuzi. In a place where it's customary to first draw up the loan document and then give the money, and then pay the money. See, here's the machlokes. Admon holds so Admon holds like this, that at the end of the day, if the money was really going to be kept, ultimately again in satisfaction of the debt. Actually, look at Rashi. So according to Admon, halacha l'maisa, the lender / seller Ruvain should have made his intentions explicitly clear. For Rabbanan Sabri, the Rabbanan will say, in other words, he should have said, I'm really only selling this land in order to go ahead and have a source of repayment should Shimon the borrower not have the ability to pay. For Rabbanan Sabri, the Rabbanan hold, Chavracha, we saw this yesterday, Chavracha Chavra Islay, your friend has a friend, the Chavra Islay, and your friend of your friend has a friend, and therefore again, if you make your intentions clear, then halacha l'maisa what? Halacha l'maisa, Shimon would back out of the transaction in such a situation. Good. So I will say, so it's a very interesting case. Halacha l'maisa, how do we paskin? So again, just to reframe the case. So Reuven lent Shimon money. Shimon then produces another document, a later document, that shows that he bought a field from Reuven. And Shimon essentially says, the loan document is clearly fraudulent. Because had I really owed you money, you would have never sold me a field. Because if I had money to buy a field, then what? Then I had money to repay my debt. So it must be that the loan document is fraudulent. Admon says, no, Reuven could say, I purposely sold you a field because this way, again, in the event of default, I now know that I have a place to collect. So I'll say, how do we paskin? So the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Malva Velova, Perek Chavdalid Halacha Yud Aleph, says this case, Hotzi Shtar Chovach Avera V'Ala Motzi Shtar Shemach Lo Asasada. So Ram says like this: Im hayu b'makom shenosen lokeach hamos v'achak chosiv lo hamoch es shtar hari shtar chovo shel zeh batel shehari omer lo ilu hayisi chayiv lecha hayu lefra chovcha. So the Rambam in fact accepts the distinction of the Gemara. If we're talking about a case where ultimately again or in a locale where they first pay money and then go ahead and write up the shtar, ultimately the loan document is batel. The loan document is batel. Because we assume that if this loan was really extant, if this was really a loan, then ultimately Reuven would have kept the purchase money in satisfaction of the debt. The fact that he did not indicates to us that the loan document, it could be void, it could be fraudulent, it could be repaid, whatever it is. The point is we don't look at the loan document as a valid transaction anymore. However, the Rambam says, if it's in a place where they first write the document and then give the money, then ultimately again, both the loan document and the transaction stand. Incredible. Good. Let's go back there. Really, very interesting cases. Mishnah. Shnaim shotziu shtar chov al zeh. This is fascinating. It's Reuven and Shimon. Reuven has a loan document against Shimon. Shimon has a loan document against Reuven. Right? So they're both motzi documents, one against the other. Look at Rashi. Shnaim shotzi shtar chov al zeh. Reuven al Shimon v'Shimon al Reuven. Shtar shotzi Reuven mukdam v'shal Shimon mu'ocher. So Rashi sets this up. Reuven's loan is earlier. In other words, Reuven's loan predates Shimon's loan. Right? Reuven's loan to Shimon predates Shimon's loan to Reuven. Good. So watch this. Admon Omer, ilu hayisi chayiv lecha, keitzer atalov imenu. So I'll say, so Admon says like this. Shimon could say to Reuven, I don't understand. Or I should say, Shimon could say to Reuven, if I really owed you money, right? Because remember, Reuven lends money to Shimon, and then Shimon has a later document that Shimon lent money to Reuven. So Reuven could say to Shimon, I don't understand. If I really owed you money, So Shimon could say to Reuven, if I really owed you money, then why would you borrow money from me? If I really owed you money, then why would you borrow money from me? So the Gemara says, and therefore essentially what Shimon is claiming is what? Is that the loan document that Reuven has against him is in fact a fraudulent document. So the Chacham say no. Zego ashtar chovo, v'zego ashtar chovo. The Chacham say not true. Everyone collects their own document. In other words, that lamaisa, we don't have to, in other words, they will say, what Admon is saying is, we can't look at these documents independently. Because again, you have Reuven lending Shimon money, Shimon lending Reuven money. Shimon says, Reuven, your document is clearly fraudulent. You clearly never lent me money. Because if you lent me money, then why would you come back and borrow money from me? It doesn't make any sense. To which the Chacham say, we look at the documents independently. Good, let's go. Says the Gemara, interesting case. Itmar, Shnaim Shotzi Shtar Chov Zeh al Zeh. You have two people who say Bryce is quoting the same case. Reuven lends, there's a document that says that Reuven lends Shimon money, and a document that says that Shimon lent Reuven money. Rav Nachman says Zegova v'Zegova. Each of them collect their respective documents. Okay, so the Gemara says Zegova v'Zegova. Rav Sheshes Omer Hafuchi Matara Salamali. Rav Sheshes says, why do we need to exchange bags? So we'll say what Rav Sheshes is essentially saying is just let everybody keep their money. In other words, this presupposes that the amounts of the debt are equal, but Lamai Sekin Rav Sheshes says there's no need for Reuven to repay Shimon and Shimon to repay Reuven. Everybody just keep their money. To which the Gemara says, Ella, Ze'omid b'shalo, v'ze'omid b'shalo. Everyone keeps their own money. So I'll say, so now watch this. The Kuli Alma, everyone agrees in the following case, Idis, ve'idis, beinonis, ubeinonis, ziburis, v'ziburis, Vade hafuche matarasahu. So we'll say second wide line. So we'll say, so now again, everyone agrees in the case where halacha lamaisa. Now we'll say, if you take a look like this, so they're assuming right now, if everybody has the same type of repayment, let's say everyone has the same type of land, they both have idis, high quality, or they both have beinonis, middle, or they both have ziburis, inferior. So in other words, what they're saying is, if each are going to be paid in like or in kind, then lemaisa, everyone agrees to just let everybody keep their money. Right? There's no need to exchange bags, so to speak. Keep it. Where does machlokes come up? The iste lechad beinonis ulechad ziburis. So we'll say the interesting machlokes comes up is what happens if one of the parties has beinonis and one of the parties has ziburis. So watch this. So Rav Nachman holds zegova v'zegova. Each party pays the other. So Ruvain pays Shimon. Shimon pays Ruvain. So the Gemara says zegova v'zegova. Kasavar b'shalohin shaman. Now I will say, take a look at Rashi. It's actually Rashi right across. B'shalohin shaman. Rashi says, Masha amru chachamim bal chov bebeinonis bebeinonis bekarkos halo v'shaman. I will say, there's a halacha. The halacha says like this: a bal chov, a creditor, right? When a creditor has to go ahead and repay his debt, so ultimately, again, he's obligated to pay beinonis, right? Middle property. I will say, what's the shaila? How do you assess beinonis? And there are three possibilities. Beinonis could be assessed based on the property of the borrower, based on the property of the lender, or based on or what we call just a general assessment, a Welt assessment, right? A world assessment as to what's considered to be beinonis property. So we'll say, so now the Gemara is suggesting is like this. Reuven lent Shimon money, Shimon lent Reuven money. Now, both remember again, in this price is different than in our Mishnah, because in the Mishnah, ultimately, again, you've got Admon saying that doesn't make any sense, because Shimon could say to Reuven, if I really owed you money, why would you go back and borrow money from me? Leaving that aside, the Brisa seems to feel such a transaction like this could exist. The shaila now is, do they have to pay each other back? So we've got Rav Shesha saying, no, everybody just hold on to their money. Right? The Rabbanan saying, no, everybody has to pay each other back. The Gemara is qualifying the statement. When they each have the same type of property, okay, everybody could just keep what they have. Where does the shaila come up? When they have different types of property. So watch this, Rav says. So Rav Nachman Savar zegova v'zegova. So Rav Nachman says that alocha l'maisa, each party gets paid back. Kasavar b'shalohin shamin. Look at Rashi now again, right across. B'shalohin shamin. Mashamru chachamim bal chol bebeinonis. When Chazal said that a creditor gets paid back with beinonis property, bikarkos halova shamin. They say we assess beinonis based on the property of the borrower. Sheniesh lelova soda she beinonis lechol adam ve'etzlo he idis sheshar shados of gruos emena ein bachov govemena. So therefore, I will say we don't. In other words, when we assess beinonis, we assess beinonis based on the properties of the borrower. So now watch this. So the Gemara says, so asi bal ziburis v'gavile lebeinonis. Therefore, I will say ultimately again, somebody, let's say a creditor who has ultimately ziburis, will go ahead and collect beinonis from the property. The hava gavye idis va'asahu the shakal ziburis. So I will say the point the Gemara is making over here is that lamaisa, because we assess repayment based on the borrower, therefore it's not considered to be a swap in kind. Because it's not considered to be a switch, which makes sense. In other words, if the property valuation for beinonis is based on the borrower, it's going to be different. Bepashtos, it's going to be different for Ruvain than it is for Shimon. So therefore, again, Ruvain is going to collect from Shimon's beinonis. Shimon is going to collect from Ruvain's beinonis, and each one pays up each other. Rav Shesha says, Hafuche mataras alamali. If Ruvain owes money to Shimon, Shimon owes money to Ruvain, assuming that they owe the same amount of money to each other. Rav Shesha says, why do we have to swap bags? Just let them each keep their own money. Kasavra b'shel kol adam hin shamin. So both are very interesting. Rav Shesha holds that the beinonis assessment is based on a general assessment of what beinonis is. It's not a subjective. So both say, I just want to point out something very interesting. If I have a portfolio of properties, right, and you have a portfolio of properties, so your beinonis is going to be different than my beinonis if it's subjective. Right? Because remember again, what does beinonis mean? If you look at my portfolio of properties, I have great properties, I have inferior properties, my beinonis is the middle. So my middle and your middle, 9.9 out of 10 times are going to be different. Because real estate is just always different. So therefore, again, it's very interesting. So therefore, the Rav Nachman holds that whenever Reuven and Shimon have loan documents against each other, they're always going to have to pay each other back. We don't say everybody just keep their money. Why? Because Rav Nachman holds that Beinonis is based on the borrower's portfolio. So therefore, again, Reuven is going to have to pay his Beinonis, Shimon's going to have to pay his Beinonis, and they're not going to be in kind. They're not going to be like items. Rav Nachman Rav Sheshes on the other hand holds that no. Beinonis assessment is based on an objective assessment of Beinonis property. If that's the case, then when Reuven owes Shimon money, Shimon owes Reuven money, essentially they both be getting the same item. Therefore, just let them each keep their money and not do any kind of exchange. Incredible. Sof. So at the end of the day, ultimately the Gemara says, right? At the end of the day, he's still going to be taking, right, his own Beinonis. Furthermore, according to Rav Nachman, why is it set up that the Baal Ziburis is getting paid first? Go ahead and ultimately again let the Baal Beinonis come first, collect from the Ziburis, and then let him go back and collect it from him. We'll say the Gemara just says it's just the way that the claim worked out. That one party claimed the other, one party made the claim first. Sof. Still at the end of the day, when they're coming to collect, they're coming at the same time. Okay, so we're getting a little technical over here. One of them has idis and beinonis, and one of them just has ziburis. So Mar Savra, once again, one opinion holds b'shalohin shamra, says Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman holds that when we assess the properties of the borrower, so I should say when we assess beinonis, we assess it based on the borrower's property. Umar Savra b'shalkal adam ein shaman. And the other opinion, i.e. Rav Sheshes, holds that no, we take a general objective assessment. So tonight, Rabbi say, let's analyze. Rabbi says, now going back to our Mishnah, zeh gove v'zeh gove. So we'll say, back in our Mishnah, the Chachamim disagreed with Admon. And the Chachamim said, Reuven has a loan against Shimon. Shimon has a loan against Reuven. Each of them collect their respective debts. To which the Gemara says, Tirgima Rav Nachman aliba de Rav Sheshes kigon shelava zel la'eser v'zel la'chamesh. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the way Rav Nachman understood this case according to Rav Sheshes is, we're talking about a situation where they both have two loans, different durations. They both say, take a look at Rashi. Last short line in Rashi, Kigon shelava zela eser, shelo yuchal hanosh shelatova ad eser shanim, di'ika ravcha damtana. Sebo said, this is very interesting. The Gemara is suggesting that according to the Chachamim, if you were to have two debts that were exactly the same, even the Chachamim would agree with Admon then, that what? Let everybody just keep their money. Fine. In other words, Reuven owes Shimon $500. Shimon owes Reuven $500. Somehow they made the debt on the same day for the same duration. Fine. Okay, keep your money. But I will say, that's not the case in the Mishnah. The case in the Mishnah is, Reuven lent Shimon money, Shimon $500 for 5 years. Shimon lent Reuven $500 for 10 years. Now I will say, everyone knows that in a loan, duration makes a very big difference. Right? At the end of the day, having money for a longer amount of time is a significant benefit. So therefore, I will say, the Gemara suggests that's the case of the Mishnah. So the amounts may be the same. What's different? Duration. Term. Thank you. So the Gemara says, hey, Chidami, what's the case? And therefore, I will say, and that's why the Rabbanan will say that halacha l'maisa, the loans, so to speak, don't cancel each other out. They both have to be repaid. Second, what's the case? So if you want to say that ultimately Reuven's loan to Shimon was for 10 years, Shimon's loan to Reuven was for 5 years, in this case, would Admon say, Ilo hayisi chayiv lecha, keitzer ata lava mimeni, halo mataz manei. See, they say, that's not necessarily true. In other words, if the durations are different, remember, Admon felt that Shimon could get out of his loan to Reuven by saying, it makes no sense. Reuven, you lent me money. Does it make sense then that you would borrow money from me? The fact that you borrowed money from me indicates that what? That you really have no existing claim. There's no loan against me. But if it's different durations, then how would Shimon be able to make that claim? Halo mataz manei, so rather it must be elarishon lechamesh, b'sheni la'aser. So it must be that what? Reuven lent Shimon money for 5 years. Shimon lent Reuven money for 10 years. So then ultimately, again, in that case, because the second loan has a longer term, therefore, again, Shimon can't undermine the authenticity of the debt, to which the Gemara says, Umay time the Admon. If that's the case, then why would Admon say that Shimon has a taina against Reuven? Lo tzricha da asubahu yom and the mashlim chamesh. What are we talking about? We're talking about a case where ultimately he comes at the last day of the 5th year. We'll say now, take a quick look at Rashi. 4 lines down in the wide lines, Rashi says, Lo tzricha da asa legabe v'lova himenu b'yom de mashlim chamesh. So we'll say this is very interesting. So rather, what's happening over here? What's happening? So Reuven lent money to Shimon for 5 years. Reuven's coming on the last day of the 5 years to go ahead and borrow money from Shimon. So the Gemara says, Mar savar avid inish diyazif liyome. So some say ultimately again it's common for a person to borrow money even for a day. Umar savar lo avid inish diyazif liyome. Others say no, it doesn't make any sense to do a transaction for a day. Okay? Rami bar Chama amar hacha biyasmi askinan. What are we talking about over here? Yisomim. Orphans. Tiyasmi migva gabi advuyo do magbina minayu. They both say, because interestingly enough, when it comes to Yisomim, orphans are only able to engage in one-sided transactions. What are the one-sided transactions? Ultimately, again, they can collect, but you cannot collect from them. So the Gemara says, I vaha ze v'ze gova katani. The Mishnah is talking about a case where both parties are able to collect from each other, to which the Gemara says, ze gova v'ze rai ligbos ve'in lo. What it means is this party is able to collect, i.e. someone could collect, the other party is entitled to collect, but ultimately, again, they can't collect. Amar Rava shtei tshuvas p'daro says doesn't make sense. 2 problems. Number 1, chada ze gova v'ze gova katani. Number 1, the Mishnah itself says that we're talking about 2 parties who are able to collect from each other. V'od ligvinu arli yasmi. Furthermore, again, go ahead and collect, right? Collect property for the Yisomim. And then you can collect it back from the Yisomim. How so? Kid Rav Nachman was a very interesting case. Rav Nachman, Amar Baravua, Yisomim shegavu karka, ksuvas, right? I'm sorry, Yisomim shegavu karka, bechovas avihen. Excuse me. So we'll say, listen to this. So children, let's say there was an outstanding debt due to the estate, right? Reuven died, left behind an estate, left behind Yisomim. There's a debt due to the Yisomim. The Yisomim are able to collect their father's debt. So Yisomim shegavu karka bechovas avihen, Bal chov chozer v'gova osamehen. A creditor against the estate then has the ability to collect that land from them. To which the Gemara says, Kasha, inachinami, you can set it up that way, it's good Kasha. V'lokma, disul yasi ziburis, ve'isul lidei idis ubenonis. So why don't we say like this? Maybe set it up as a case where the Yisomim have ziburis, right, inferior property, and the other party, the other creditor, has idis ubenonis, the azli yasmi gabu benonis. So the Yisomim as creditors are entitled to go and collect benonis, but I will say, remember again, whenever you collect from Yisomim, you're only allowed to collect ziburis. Umagbeluhu b'ziburis. Di'inami b'shalkol adam ein shamin. Because even if you say that Allah l'maisa, we use objective assessments for idis and ziburis. Ein nifra'im minichsi Yisom elam ziburis. In general, whenever you collect from the Yisomim, you can only collect with ziburis. To which the Gemara says, Hanimili heicha delo tafas. So it says very interesting. When do we say you can only collect from the Yisomim with ziburis? That's if you didn't seize something else. Aval heicha de tafas. But halacha l'maaseh, if you seized some other form, then ultimately again you would be permitted to go ahead and retain it. Good. So it says you can see this devolved into a very technical and complicated situation. We began with a very simple case. What was a very simple case? Reuven lends money to Shimon, Shimon lends money to Reuven. So the shayla is, how do we look at these two transactions? Admon seems to feel we cannot look at these transactions independently. We must look at them as one transaction. And the problem is when you look at them as one, not as one transaction, but we must look at them together. And the problem is when you look at them together, what's the problem? It doesn't make any sense. What doesn't make sense? Because if Shimon could come along and say, Reuven, if you had really lent me money, then what? Why would you be borrowing from me? That doesn't make sense. So it sounds like that according to Admon, Shimon would be able to claim that the loan document that Reuven is producing is clearly fraudulent. The Chachamim say, no, The Chacham say, no, not true. Essentially, there's no need to look at these two documents together. Each document stands on its own, and no need to combine the two claims at all. Reuven pays his debt to Shimon, Shimon pays his debt to Reuven, and shelema. So how do we paskin? Shabbos says, so Rambam paskins, again, it's actually the same parak. Hilchos Mava Velova, parak Chavdalit. Shabbos say, in the previous surah, according to you from Halacha Yud Aleph, this is from Halacha Yud. Shnaim Shol Tzia Kol Echad Mishneim Shtar Chol V'Chavero. Reuven and Shimon both produced loan documents against each other. Ein ha'acharon yochol lomar l'rishon, ilu hayisi chayiv l'cha, heich atalov mimeno, ela zeg gove chovo, v'zeg gove chovo. Shabbos says, Halacha L'maisa, the Rambam Paskins like the Chachamim, even though it looks strange that you have a loan document, Reuven to Shimon, Shimon back to Reuven, Rambam says it's fine. People engage in transactions for a whole variety of different reasons. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, Shimon can't claim Reuven, your document is clearly fraudulent, because had I really borrowed money from you, you would have never borrowed money from me. Rather, both Reuven's document is valid, Shimon's document is valid, and they both have to go ahead and pay back each other. Beautiful. They both say that is the halacha l'maisa and the takeaway. They both say now we come to another incredible sugya. Watch this. Going to open the door to another number of beautiful sugyas ahead of us as we close out the Masechta. So shalosh artzos l'nisuin. There are three different lands when it comes to marriage. Now, say, now what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. 3 lines are from the bottom in Rashi. Gimel artzos l'nisuin. Shalosh artzos in Beretz Yisrael. Now we'll say there are three, I shouldn't say lands, but three distinct, we'll call it areas. 3 distinct areas, districts almost. 3 distinct areas in Eretz Yisrael. Chalukos le'inyan nisui isha, shemnasa isha ba'achas mehen, ein yachal lekofa leilech acharav me'eretz al eretz. So we'll say, now the point of this we're going to see is, there are 3 regions, 3 distinct regions in Eretz Yisrael. Now what that teaches us is as follows. Well, let's see. Shalos arsos l'nisuin Yehuda, Ever Hayarden, v'Hagalil. We'll say these are the 3 regions in Eretz Yisrael, right? Again, Yehuda, Eva Hayarden, Transjordanian areas, and the Galil. For lack of a better term, we'll call that the north. A motzin mi'ir li'ir, mikrach l'krach. Shabbos say, if you marry a woman in one of these regions, a husband has no right to force her to move from one region to another region. That's the halacha, right? And now again, Shabbos say, what that means is mi'ir li'ir, mikrach l'krach. Ir is a town. Krach is a large city. We're going to see the distinction between the two. We'll see the distinction between the two. Here, if you look at Rashi says, last Rashi on the daf, so we'll say, so again, you can't go ahead and force her to move from one region to another region. Rashi says, Krach gadol mi'ir. A city is larger than a town. Fumakom shvakim u'shukim v'chol u'ikol sivav ba'im shal nischar. So we'll say it's big difference between a town and the city. Is the city has marketplaces, right? The city we're going to see has all of the different amenities necessary for living, right? And a town often doesn't. Okay, Ava ba'ol sa'ar, back to the Mishnah, motziyah mi'ir li'ir mikrach al-krach. I will say, but within one region, so let's say, for example, let's say Reuven married Rachel. Rachel's from Yehuda. So Reuven can't force Rachel to move from Yehuda to the Galil. But in Yehuda itself, he could go and compel her to move from one town to another town, or from one city to another city. Amud Beis. Aval, lo mi'ir l'krach v'lo mikrach li'ir. Fascinating. Notice, however, he cannot force her to move from a town to a city, or from a city to a town. So let's say, see here what's happening over here? So halacha number one is if you marry a woman from a certain region, you cannot go ahead and force her to move to a different region within Eretz Yisrael. That's number one. Within one region, you can't force her to move as long as what? Is what we'll call a parallel move. From a town to a town, city to a city. However, you cannot compel her to move from a city to a town, or from a town to a city. Okay, we'll see why. So the Gemara says, Motziyah minav v'hara l'nav hayafa. Similarly, again, I will say within one region, a husband could compel upon his wife to go ahead and move from a nice place, right, from a nice house to from a compromised dwelling to a nice dwelling. But he can't compel upon her to move from a nice house to a not so nice house. Rabbi Shimon, let's listen to this. The truth is, the husband can't even compel upon his wife to move from a not nice dwelling to a nice dwelling. Why? Mipnei sha'nava hayafe bodek. Because ultimately, again, the nice dwelling, bodek. Now, both say, we're going to see what this lashon means. Bodek, Rashi says, bodek es haguf l'misha ba minavar mitoch kach haloim b'imalav. Bodek means like it's difficult for her. It's difficult for her. Now we'll discuss what exactly is so difficult on moving from a not nice house to a nice house, right? So we'll discuss that. So we'll say, Bishlam mikrach li'ir. So we'll say, so let's go back for just a moment. Now, again, remember, so halacha one, can't force a woman to move from one region of Eretz Yisrael to another region of Eretz Yisrael. Halacha two is that even within the same region, you can't force a woman to move from a city to a town or from a town to a city. So Bishlam mikrach li'ir, I understand why Reuven can't force Rachel to move from a city to a town to Bikrach Shrichi Kol Mili, Bi'er Lo Shrichi Kol Mili. Because I will say that's a step down in lifestyle, right? In a city, you have all the amenities of living. So Rachel got used to living in a city where she has her shopping, she has, the food establishment, she has everything there. So Lamaisa, again, to force her to move to a town where there's nothing, I understand that's a step down in lifestyle. Ela Me'ir Lekrach, my time up. I will say, what's wrong with going? In other words, what? It sounds like a good move to move from the town to the city. Why can't he compel upon her to do that? Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Rabbi Yossi is incredible. This supports Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Minayin, listen to this. She shivas krachim kasha. Rabbi Yossi, how do we know that it's difficult for a person to live in a city? City dwelling is difficult. How do we know this? Rabbi Yossi, listen to this. This is incredible. Shene'emar vayivarchu ha'am l'chol ha'noshim ha'misnadvim la'sheves b'Yerushalayim. We'll say this is a wild pasuk. The pasuk in Nehemiah says that when Ezra, Nehemiah brought back the Jews from Babel to Eretz Yisrael, we'll say, get ready for this. No one wanted to live in Yerushalayim. No one wanted to live in Yerushalayim. Jerry's over here on Zoom. Mamish. I would give anything to switch places, right? So what happens? So no one wanted to live in Yerushalayim. So what do they do? The misnadvim. So there are people who volunteered to live in Yerushalayim. And the rest of the nation gave them a bracha. Shebiwith hatzlacha. So I will say, see again, Yerushalayim was a city. No one wanted to live there. And again, the people, they got a special bracha. So I will say, by the way, just I'll point out, I will say, just you understand, like what a circle Klal Yisrael has made. Right? So I will say, right, so when they came back, right, 2,500 years ago, no one wanted to live in Yerushalayim. Now, good luck finding a piece of real estate in Yerushalayim. I want to say, if you don't hear the footsteps of Mashiach in that, you have to have your spiritual hearing checked. It's incredible. It's incredible the times in which we live, right? You can't touch real estate in Yerushalayim. You can't. So again, no one wants to live there. To the point that it's the greatest privilege in the world to be able to live in Yerushalayim. Just an incredible circle. Sometimes we don't appreciate. We'll say, I want to point out, like, everybody is used to talking about, like, the problems of Klal Yisrael. Right? What's the problems? We have this problem. It's true. There are plenty of challenges. But there are also a lot of really good things. Right? And a lot of really beautiful things. And to recognize and to never lose sight of the fact that we're living in just such incredible times for our nation. A resurgence of Torah, a resurgence of Eretz Yisrael, seeing Eretz Yisrael come back to life in such a dramatic way. It's absolute. I'll just tell you something. Yeah, okay. There's more to talk about this. Well, again, just sometimes you see this, especially in Eretz Yisrael. I'll just give you just like a little, like, hopefully you're supposed to go to Eretz Yisrael in the next couple of weeks. So just curious, just like, you look at hotels. Let's say it is wild. I don't know, something must be happening in the month of November, right? But Lamaisa, again, it's incredible. A land that was desolate, right? A land that no one wanted, a sea that no one wanted, and now a premier destination. Incredible. Okay, in any event, we'll say, I'll point out over here, so what's so bad about What's so bad about city dwelling? Or the Gemara didn't tell us what the problem is. So look at Rashi. It's actually very interesting. Rashi says, "Yeshivas krachin kasha shakom is yashvin sham." So this I understand. Cities are congested. Everyone lives there. V'dochakin umekarvin abatim zulazu. For us to listen to it, it's interesting. So what's the problem with city dwelling? A lot of congestion, and everyone lives very close to each other. Right? All the houses are very close to each other. Ve'ein sham avir. The air quality is not as good. Aval bi'ir, rather say you live in a town, you have land. Yesh ganos upardesim smuchim abatim v'avir yavash. I will say it's the same thing, right? City dwelling is congested. You move out to the suburbs, you move out to the town, you have a yard, you have some property, you have some space, you don't live on top of your neighbors, right? So again, it's a little bit, so as I said, again, it's interesting that the Gemara felt compelled to bring this raya from Yusha. I have to tell you, when I was reading this Gemara a little bit, I felt like a little bit bad, like, it feels like an unnecessary knock on Yerushalayim, right? You always have to be careful with the covet of Eretz Yisrael. That was the chait of the Meraglim, that they took liberties with the covet of Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael has feelings. Eretz Yisrael has covet. Eretz Yisrael has dignity. And a Jew has to be careful to never say anything disparaging about Eretz Yisrael. Just found it interesting that the Gemara had to bring this in. The truth is, even without this, I would have known, everyone knows the distinction between city life and suburbia, right? Of course, everyone knows the difference. So again, in any event, the Gemara wanted to bring a biblical raya that city dwelling is challenging, and here it is. So therefore, I will say, for our purposes, therefore, Allah Lamaisa, now I understand. A husband can compel his wife to move from a city to a town, because if she's living in the city, she's used to all the amenities, but he also can't force her to move from a town to a city, because if she's used to living, again, a more suburban type of life, right, a more bucolic type of life, then Allah Lamaisa, he can't take her to the big city. Beautiful. Rav Shimon says, so let's remember again, Rav Shimon says something amazing. Rav Shimon Paskin, that Allah Lamaisa, a husband isn't even allowed to move his wife from a nice house, can't compel her to move from a compromised house to a nice house. So the Gemara says, because it's bodek. My bodek, Rabbi said, this is an incredible Gemara. Kiddush Shmuel, Damer Shmuel, Shinui Veses, Tchilas Cholim E'ayim. Rabbi says this. Now, Shinui Veses literally means any change. Rashi says, Afilu Litova. Any change. Now, Rabbi say, here they happen to be talking about change in diet. Right? A change in diet, cholim me'ayim, ultimately again could cause stomach issues. So the Gemara says, Kasab Sefer Ben Sira says in Sefer Ben Sira, Kol Yimei Ani Roim. All the days of a poor person are bad. That's because an Ani is always hungry. What about Shabbos and Yom Tiv? Right, where Bepashtos the Aniyim have food also. That any change of diet is the beginning, ultimately, again, of stomach issues. Ben Sira says, let's finish this off. Ben Sira says, before we get to this, so therefore, again, it's very interesting. Rabbi says, what Shmuel is saying is, a husband can't compel his wife to move from a compromised house to a nice house either. Why? Rabbi say, why? Change is difficult. And Rabbi says, we know what Rashi says? Even Latova, even good change is difficult. I will say, what an incredibly profound and affirming Gemara. Because the Gemara is saying is any type of change, even change that I know is good for me, even change that I know is positive for me. People don't like change. We resist change. Even when the change is objectively good, often we'll put all of our kochos into resisting it. I will say, it's so incredibly profound. How many of us walk around life knowing, I have to change the way I do certain things. I have to change certain behaviors. I have to change certain attitudes. I have to change certain dispositions. I have to change certain outlooks. I have to change certain hashkafas. I have to change certain ways that I raise my family. I know changes I have to make. So why don't I make them? Because change is difficult. And even good change is difficult. And every once in a while, even it's good to have a little bit of affirmation, a little bit of validation. So Chazal are telling us, even objectively good change. A husband wants his wife, honey, I built us a beautiful new house. She says, no, I'm good here. What? It's got all this, it has that. It's objectively a better home. So you see, at the end of the day, change is difficult. And there Rabbi Shimon says, he can't compel upon her to go ahead to move to the nicer house. Absolutely incredible. Ben Sira and Besira says, just continuing on this idea, Af leilos b'shafel. Af leilos. Even the nights of an ani are difficult. Why? B'shafel gagim gago, because the ani's roof is normally lower than the other rooftops of the house. Or v'marom harim karmo, and his vineyard is often at a higher peak than everyone else. Therefore, mimater gagim lagago, at night he can't sleep, or he often gets leaks, because his roof is lower. Everyone else's rainwater, right? I believe the technical term is sheets off, right? Is that the technical term? Right? The rainwater sheets off from everyone else's roof to his rooftop. So again, he constantly getting leaks, and at the end of the day, and I will say, we offer karma l'kramim. And furthermore, again, when the wind blows, ultimately, again, it kicks up the dirt from everyone else's vineyard, and again, the dirt attaches itself to the highest point. The wind takes it to his vineyard. Good. We'll say, so that's the end of the sugi here. We'll say an incredible sugi. So much more to say. I'll just tell you very quickly. Actually, no, I'm not going to tell you very quickly. Let's go back, Jaya. Again, there's a beautiful piece on the Sefer Ben Sira, but let's maybe we'll save it for the Siyam. Good. Mishnah. We'll say, watch this sugi. Hakol ma'alim Eretz Yisrael. Here we go. We'll say, listen to this. So the Mishnah for now just introduced us to what a husband is permitted to compel his wife to do or not. Right? So both say, so now listen to this. So now the Mishnah says, Eretz Yisrael, Hakol, everyone could force the family unit to make aliyah. Right? I will say, now who's everyone? Now the truth is, everyone means either husband or wife. So a husband wakes up one morning and says, we're moving to Eretz Yisrael, his wife, his family is obligated to follow. Wife wakes up one morning and says, we're moving to Eretz Yisrael. Everyone is the household is bound by the decision of whoever wants to move to Eretz Yisrael. So Hakol ma'alim Eretz Yisrael, ve'ena kol motziin. I will say, but the opposite is not true. In other words, let's say Reuven and Rachel are living in Eretz Yisrael. Reuven says, I want to go back. Ultimately, Rachel could say no, and Reuven cannot force the family to move. Hakol ma'alim Yerushalayim. I will say, it's fascinating. Everyone could force a move. Now, I'll say, brother, take a look at Rashi. Hakol ma'alim, es kol b'nei beiso, Adam kofa lalos v'yashik imo b'Yushalayim. So good. So I'll say, similarly again, Yerushalayim. Let's say they're living in Eretz Yisrael, and now Reuven decides we're moving to Yerushalayim. He could compel upon his family to go move to Yerushalayim. Ve'ena kol motziin. But ultimately, again, once they're living in Yerushalayim, no member could compel the family to leave. Echad ha'anoshim ve'echad ha'anoshim. And I will say, by the way, the Eretz Yisrael option could be triggered by either husband or wife. Incredible sugya. We'll say, now watch this. Nasa isha Eretz Yisrael, the Ger Eretz Yisrael. Reuven marries Rachel in Eretz Yisrael. They get divorced in Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, now we're going to get technical for just a moment. What form of currency is used for ksuba payment? No shelema maz Eretz Yisrael. He pays her in Eretz Yisrael money. Nasa isha Eretz Yisrael, the Ger Kapotkia. If he married in Eretz Yisrael but he divorced her in Kapotkia, no shelema maz Eretz Yisrael. Ultimately, again, he pays her in Eretz Yisrael money. Okay. Nos isha v'kapotkia v'gersha Eretz Yisrael. If you married her in Kapotkia and divorced in Eretz Yisrael, no sinla mimaos Eretz Yisrael. He pays her in Eretz Yisrael money. Now, say that there doesn't seem to be a theme in all of this, so we'll have to see why he means this. Rav Shimon says, no sinla mimaos Kapotkia. Rav Shimon seems to say, no. Sounds like what he's saying is you always pay in Kapotkia currency. But I would say, by the way, Kapotkia currency is better than Eretz Yisrael currency, or at least was better than Eretz Yisrael currency. Okay? Nos isha v'kapotkia v'gersha v'kapotkia, but everyone agrees. If you're married in Kapotkia, divorced in Kapotkia, no sinla mimos Kapotkia. You pay Kapotkian currency. Okay, good. We'll get to the currency part. Sakom malin asuyemai. So we'll say, now the Mishnah said, everyone could force the family to go up to Eretz Yisrael. What does that come to include? Lasuye avodim. I will say, comes to include avodim. Now, what this means is as follows. Rashi said, now what this means is not that the Eved could force the family to go to Eretz Yisrael. What it means is like this. If Reuven and Rachel own an Eved Ivri, or have an Eved Ivri, you don't really fully own an Eved Ivri. You have an Eved Ivri, right? And now Reuven and Rachel decide they're moving to Eretz Yisrael. They could force their Eved Ivri to come with them. So Gemara says, but according to the opinion that lists avadim explicitly, so what does the Mishnah? Who does the Mishnah come to include? La suye mina v'hayafa lena v'hara. Wow. Rabbi say it comes to include what? That even if they live in a beautiful home in Baltimore, and then again Reuven and Rachel decide right? Rachel says, we're moving to Eretz Yisrael, and all they can get is what? Right? A one-bedroom apartment. Then Allah says she could trigger the aliyah option, and now the entire family has to go. Incredible. But again, once they're in Eretz Yisrael, neither party could trigger an immediate return. What does that come to include? Lasuyi eved shebarach mechutza la'aretz la'aretz. It was very interesting. This refers to an eved Kenani. An eved Kenani who ran away from chutz la'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. So now what happened? Darmin alei. So we'll say, Darmin alei, zab mehach avazil, mishum yeshivas Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, we say to the owner, listen, either leave him alone and let him live here, or sell him to, either emancipate him and let him live here, or sell him to someone else who is living Eretz Yisrael. But if an Eved Kenani runs away from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, there is no obligation to return him back to Chutz La'aretz. Incredible. To which the Gemara said, good. Good. So also when we say everyone has the right to trigger, right, a move to Yerushalayim, who does everyone include? Both say, let's say again, I have a beautiful apartment in Modi'in, and all I can get is an average apartment in Yerushalayim. Still, if one of the parties, husband or wife, wants to move to Yerushalayim, they trigger that option. But once in Yerushalayim, neither party could trigger a move. That includes once they're in Yerushalayim, even if there's a nicer apartment waiting for them, Modi'in, ultimately, neither party could compel the other to leave Yerushalayim. And I will say, to preserve symmetry, since the first part of the Mishnah said they can't force a move, the second part of the Mishnah also said you can't force a move. Incredible. I will say, let's go back to a little bit. Really incredible sugya. Who omer la'alos, vihi omer shelo la'alos. So we'll say, now we get into the nitty-gritty over here, right? So here we go. Reuven is married to Rachel. Reuven says, Rachel, we're moving to Eretz Yisrael. And Rachel says, no, we're not. Common situation, right? Right? You don't notice a common situation that often you don't have agreement. I don't mean the husband or the wife, but I'm saying often could happen that husband and wife are not on the same page with these things. So what's the halacha? Kofin osalalos. Ultimately, the halacha compels upon her to follow her husband. Ve'im lav teitzi b'lo ksuva. But if not, halacha l'maisa, he could divorce her and she loses her ksuva. Very dramatic. He omeres lalos v'hom shalos. She wants to make aliyah. He says ultimately again, I don't want to go. What's the halacha? Kofin osalalos. We force him to go. Ve'im lav, and if not, yotzi v'yitin ksuva. Ultimately again, he's obligated to divorce her, and ultimately again pay her ksuva. He omeres lotzeis v'hu omer shalo lotzeis. They're in Eretz Yisrael now. He says we're leaving. She says I'm not leaving. She says let's leave. He says I don't want to leave. Kofin osa shlo. We compel upon her not to leave. Ve'im lav, if she wants to leave, teitzi v'lo ksuva. Ultimately again, so he can divorce her without a ksuva. Hu omer lotzeis v'hu omer shalo lotzeis. He says I want to leave. She says I don't want to leave. Kofin also shalo lotzeis. Ultimately again, we force her not to leave. Ve'im lav, He wants to leave. She doesn't want to leave. Kofin also shalo. So we force him to remain. Ve'im lav, and if not, yotzi v'yitin ksuva. Then ultimately, again, he divorces her and ultimately gives her ksuva. So we'll say very compelling Gemara. I just want to point out, if you look at Tosas, very, very famous Tosas, right? Tosas says, Hu omer la'alos. You see that Tosas? Very important. Tosas writes, Eino noeg bisman hazeh. This halacha no longer applies, says Tosas. Which halacha? That a husband says, I want to go ahead and make aliyah. A wife says, I don't want to go. Then what? We force her to go, and if she doesn't want to go, he could divorce her without a ksuba, or vice versa. Tosa says this halacha no longer applies. Why? De'ika sakanas drachim. Because ultimately now, there's a danger to live in Eretz Yisrael. There's a danger. The Rebbe says it's interesting. The Gemara understands the danger much more to be associated with the journey to get to Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says, "V'hayo omer Rabbeinu Chaim da'avshav eino mitzvah ladar be'Eretz Yisrael ki'esh kama mitzvahs hatluyas ba'aretz ve'kama onshin de'ein anu yicholnu lizar b'hen v'lam arahem." So it's also very interesting. So Tosas gives two reasons why this halacha no longer applies today. Number one, because there's sakana associated with living in Eretz Yisrael, which again doesn't sound like it would really contemporarily, that reason would apply today, because halacha l'maaseh sounds to put that the danger is associated with the journey, not with the dwelling. Okay, but Rabbi also says it. And number two, Rabbeinu Chaim. Rabbeinu Chaim says that there are many mitzvos associated with living in Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvos hataluyos ba'aretz. And people, unfortunately, are not vigilant with those mitzvos. So because of that, Rabbeinu Chaim says, therefore the mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael today is not the same. And General Abbas said, the backdrop to this, and we'll get into this tomorrow, is there a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael or not? Is there a mitzvah? And if there is a mitzvah, what is the nature of the mitzvah? So that we'll get into a little bit more tomorrow. I just want to point out that Tosfos brings down this idea of one spouse compelling another spouse to move to Eretz Yisrael. And if the other spouse doesn't comply, right, if it's the wife, divorce, no ksuva. Husband, divorce with a ksuva, Tosfos is just bringing down halacha l'maisa, does no longer applies anywhere. I will say, just in the 1 minute I have, we're going to start with for today. In 1 minute I had, I wanted to go back. I didn't mention something very beautiful on yesterday's Daf because we ran out of time also, as we're about to now. I will say, if you remember again, the last Mishnah that we ended off with in yesterday's Daf was a fascinating case of Misha Halach L'Medinas Hayam Va'avda Derech. Right, remember again the case if someone goes overseas, right? He had a rite of passage to his field in the middle, but then the rite of passage, he lost the rite of passage. I saw a magnificent idea by Rabbi Nachman L'Kuti Halachas. And Rabbi Nachman says like this, there's a beautiful ashkaf on that. Sometimes in life, Misha Halach L'Medinas Hayam. I will say, you know what happens? Sometimes in life, we check out. We just check out. You know, I'm not attentive enough to my ruchnius. I'm not attentive enough to my spiritual needs. And it's almost as if I'm on vacation. And what happens ultimately, again, when you're on vacation? Of the derech. What happens when you check out from your ruchnius for too long? You lose your way. But I will say, what's the whole point of the Mishnah? Even if you lose your way in life, you can always reclaim it. Is it easy? Absolutely not. And sometimes there's a high cost. To pay. But lamaisa, even if you lose your way, even if you spend too much time in Dinas Hayim v'Abdallah Haderech, there's always a way back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's always a way back to ourselves. I will say shkoyach.
They're misnafin because